Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie The Revenant in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Revenant. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. The Revenant is a 2015 American epic Western action drama film directed by Alejandro G. Iñárritu. The screenplay by Mark L. Smith and Iñárritu is based in part on Michael Punk's 2002 novel The Revenant, which describes frontiersman Hugh Glass's experiences in 1823. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Glass alongside Tom Hardy, Domhnall Gleeson, and Will Poulter. In August 2001, Akiva Goldsman purchased Punk's manuscript. Iñárritu signed on to direct The Revenant in August 2011. In April 2014, after several delays due to other projects, Iñárritu confirmed that he was beginning work on it and that DiCaprio had the lead role. Principal photography began in October 2014. Location and crew concerns delayed production from May to August 2015. The Revenant premiered at TCL Chinese Theater in Los Angeles, California on December 16, 2015. It had a limited release on December 25th and a wide release on January 8, 2016. It was a blockbuster, grossing $533 million worldwide. It received critical acclaim, with praise for the performances, particularly for DiCaprio and Hardy, Iñárritu's direction, and Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography. However, some criticism went to its runtime. It won 3 Golden Globe Awards and 5 BAFTA Awards, including Best Film at both ceremonies. At the 88th Academy Awards, the film received 12 nominations, including Best Picture and Best Supporting Actor, Hardy. It won the Academy Awards for Best Director, Iñárritu, his second consecutive in that category, Best Actor, DiCaprio, his first after 5 previous nominations, and Best Cinematography, Emmanuel Lubezki, his third consecutive in that category. DiCaprio also won the Golden Globe Award, the Screen Actors Guild Award, the BAFTA Award, and the Critics' Choice Award for Best Actor. Plot: fur trapper Hugh Glass watches as American soldiers burn down a Native American village on the Great Plains. Years later, in late 1823, during the Arikara War, Glass guides Captain Andrew Henry's trappers through the unorganized territory of the present-day Dakotas. While he and his half-Pawnee son, Hawk, are hunting, the company's camp is attacked by an Arikara war party which is seeking to recover its chief's abducted daughter, Powaka. Many of the trappers are killed during the fight, and the rest of them escape onto a boat. Guided by Glass, the survivors begin a trek to Fort Kiowa on foot, because Glass believes traveling down the Missouri River will make them vulnerable. After docking, the crew stash their pelts near the shore. While scouting game, Glass is mauled and left near death by a grizzly bear. Fearing another Arikara attack, trapper John Fitzgerald argues that the group must mercy kill Glass and keep moving. Henry agrees, but he is unable to pull the trigger. Instead, he offers to pay anyone who will stay with Glass and bury him after he dies. When the only volunteers are Hawk and the young Jim Bridger, Fitzgerald, wanting the money to recoup his losses from the abandoned pelts, also agrees to stay. After the others leave, Fitzgerald attempts to smother Glass but is stopped when Hawk intervenes. Fitzgerald stabs Hawk to death as Glass watches helplessly. The next morning, Fitzgerald convinces Bridger, who is unaware of Hawk's murder, that the Arikara are approaching and they must abandon Glass. At first, Bridger protests, but he ultimately follows Fitzgerald after the latter leaves Glass half buried alive in a makeshift grave. Bridger leaves behind a canteen on which he had engraved a spiral symbol. The next morning, Bridger forces Fitzgerald to admit that there are no pursuing Arikara. They reach the fort, and Fitzgerald falsely reports to Henry that Hawk vanished and Glass died. Bridger is complicit in the lie about Glass's death, but remains unaware of Hawk's murder. Glass starts an arduous journey through the wilderness, bringing Bridger's canteen with him. He performs a crude cauterization of his wounds and eludes the pursuing Arikara by jumping into river rapids. He encounters Pawnee refugee Hecuck, who tells Glass that revenge is in the Creator's hands. The men share bison meat and travel together. As a storm approaches, Hecuck constructs a sweat lodge for the feverish Glass to shelter in. After a hallucinogenic experience in the lodge, Glass emerges to discover that French-Canadian hunters have lynched Hecuck. Glass infiltrates the hunters' camp and sees their leader, Toussaint, raping Powaka. Glass frees her. With a knife provided by Glass, she threatens Toussaint with castration to silence him from alerting the other Frenchmen, and then flees while Glass kills several hunters and recovers Hecuck's horse, leaving Bridger's canteen behind. The following day, Glass is ambushed by the Arikara and drives over a cliff on his horse as he escapes their pursuit. He survives the night by disemboweling the dead horse and sheltering nude inside its carcass. A French survivor staggers into Fort Kiowa, and Bridger recognizes the man's spiral-engraved canteen. Believing that it was stolen, Henry organizes a search party. Fitzgerald, realizing that Glass is alive, empties the outpost's safe and flees, intending to reach Texas. The search party finds the exhausted Glass. Furious, Henry orders the arrest of Bridger upon returning to the fort, but Glass vouches for him, saying Bridger was deceived by Fitzgerald, who murdered Hawk. Glass and Henry set out in pursuit of Fitzgerald. After the two men split up, Fitzgerald ambushes, kills, and scalps Henry. Glass props up Henry's corpse on his horse to act as a decoy, taking its place himself to ambush Fitzgerald and shoot him in the shoulder. He pursues Fitzgerald to a riverbank, where they engage in a brutal fight. Glass is about to kill Fitzgerald, but he spots a band of Arikara downstream. He remembers Hecuck's words and pushes Fitzgerald downstream into the hands of the Arikara. Their chief, Elk Dog, kills Fitzgerald by stabbing him in the head and then scalps his body, and the Arikara, who have found Powaka, spare Glass. Glass retreats into the mountains, where he is visited by his wife's spirit. Cast: Leonardo DiCaprio as Hugh Glass, Tom Hardy as John S. Fitzgerald, Domhnall Gleeson as Andrew Henry, Will Poulter as Jim Bridger, Forrest Goodluck as Hawk, Paul Anderson as Anderson, Christopher Yoner as Murphy, Dwayne Howard as Elk Dog, Milau Nakeko as Powaka, Arthur Redcloud as Hecuck, Lucas Haas as Jones, Brendan Fletcher as Fryman, Tom Geary as Billy Brother Trapper, Grace Dove as Hugh Glass's wife, Fabrice Addy as Toussaint Music. Main article: The Revenant soundtrack. The musical score was composed by Japanese musician Ryuichi Sakamoto and German electronic musician Alva Noto, with additional music composed by Bryce Dessner. The main body of the score was recorded at the Seattle Music Scoring Stage in the Baxter Chapel in Greater Seattle, Washington, by musicians of the Northwest Sinfonia. Sakamoto conducted these sessions. Bryce Dessner's portion of the score was performed by the 25-piece Berlin-based orchestra known as TARGAZ, under conductor Andre de Ritter. Additional licensed music includes Become Ocean, the Pulitzer Prize and Grammy Award-winning work of John Luther Adams, as recorded by the Seattle Symphony with conductor Ludovic Morlot, and an excerpt of Yetsun Mila from French musician and composer Eliane Radigue. A soundtrack album was released online on December 25, 2015, and on CD on January 8, 2016. Milan Records released a vinyl pressing of the soundtrack in April 2016. The score by Sakamoto and Noto was ruled ineligible for the Academy Award for Best Original Score at the 2016 Oscars, as it was deemed that it was assembled from the music of more than one composer. Release: The Revenant had a limited release in the United States on December 25, 2015, including Los Angeles, making it eligible for the 88th Academy Awards, before being released nationwide on January 8, 2016. The film opened in Australia on January 7, 2016, and in the United Kingdom on January 15, 2016. In the Philippines, the film's release date was originally set for January 27, 2016, but it was eventually delayed 1 week to February 3, 2016. Although studios initially chose not to pursue a theatrical release in China, following its 3 wins at the 88th Academy Awards on February 28, 2016, the film was granted a release in China, but with several cuts. It was released on March 18, 2016. Reception. Box office. The Revenant grossed $183.6 million in the United States and Canada and $349.3 million in other countries for a worldwide total of $533 million against a production budget of $135 million. In March 2016, before the film had completed its theatrical domestic and international runs, Deadline Hollywood calculated the net profit of the film to be $61.6 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues. In North America, The Revenant opened in limited release on December 25, 2015, and over the weekend grossed $474,560 from 4 theaters in New York City and Los Angeles, $180,640 per screen, finishing 23rd at the box office. It was the second biggest theater average of 2015, behind the $130,000 4-screen debut of Steve Jobs. The film earned a total of $1.6 million from its 2-week limited run before expanding wide on January 8, 2016 across 3,371 theaters. It earned $2.3 million from its early Thursday preview showings from 2,510 theaters. On its opening day, the film earned $14.4 million, ranking first at the box office. The film grossed $39.8 million in its opening weekend from 3,375 theaters, exceeding initial projections by 70%, and finishing second at the box office behind Star Wars: The Force Awakens, $42.4 million, which was on its 4th weekend of play. It was the director's biggest opening of all time, and the 4th biggest for DiCaprio and supporting actor Tom Hardy. Critics noted that The Force Awakens had an advantage from playing at 781 more theaters, family-friendly Sunday matinees, and all North American IMAX theaters. Nevertheless, The Revenant played very balanced across the U.S. and overperformed in all states except the Northeast region. Its wide release weekend is among the top openings in January. It topped the box office in its 5th weekend overall and 3rd weekend in wide release after competing with Ride Along 2 in its 2nd weekend. It added $16 million in its 3rd weekend, which was down 49.7%, but topped the box office, despite a blizzard blanketing most of the East Coast, which reportedly hurt many films' box office performance. The following weekend, it was overtaken by Fox's own animated movie Kung Fu Panda 3, thereby topping the box office for one weekend. Following the announcement of the Oscar nominees on January 14th, The Revenant witnessed the biggest boost among the Best Picture category, jumping from $54.1 million to $170.5 million, an increase of 250% up to the Oscar ceremony in the weekend ending February 28th. Outside North America, the film secured a release in 78 countries. It made $20.5 million from 2,407 screens in just 18 markets, placing behind The Force Awakens at the international box office chart and first among newly released films. The following weekend, it added $32.3 million from 25 markets on 4,849 screens. The film topped the international box office in its 3rd weekend, the same weekend when it topped the U.S. box office, overtaking The Force Awakens with $33.7 million from 48 markets. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, it took the number 1 spot with $7.87 million or £5.2 million, $7.4 million from 589 theaters, and remained there for a second weekend, declining by 24%, with $3.86 million, £5.5 million, and for a third weekend. Similarly, in Russia, it passed The Force Awakens to take the top spot with $7.5 million from 163 screens. In France, it has the biggest opening day in Paris and the 3rd biggest opening weekend of 2016 with $8.2 million. It also opened at number 1, $5.1 million, Spain, $4 million, the Netherlands, $1.3 million, Belgium, $1.1 million, Argentina, $955,000, Sweden, $914,000, South Korea, Denmark, Norway, Israel, Egypt, and Portugal, among other markets. In Germany, $4.6 million, and Australia, $2.9 million. It debuted at number 2, both behind The Force Awakens, and in Brazil, $2.17 million behind The Ten Commandments. It had one of the top 10 openings of all time for a Fox film, not accounting for inflation in South Korea with $5.7 million, and went on to top the box office there for a second weekend with $3.22 million, despite cold weather affecting theater attendance, resulting in low box office performance. In Russia, though not opening at number 1, it topped the box office in its second weekend with $4.4 million, more than The Force Awakens, and went on to the top for a third weekend with $3.6 million. In China, it had an opening day of around $11 million from more than 11,000 screens, including $250,000 in midnight previews and $23 million in 2 days. In its opening weekend, it grossed $31 million, coming in second place behind the animated Zootopia. IMAX comprised $2.3 million on 278 screens. In terms of total earnings, its largest markets outside of the U.S. and Canada are China, $58.6 million, the United Kingdom, $32.8 million, Germany, $28.7 million, and France, $28.2 million. The film opened in Japan on March 23rd. Great film has the power to convey the unimaginable. We sit in the comfort of a darkened theater or our living room and watch protagonists suffer through physical and emotional pain that most of us can't really comprehend. Too often, these endurance tests feel manipulative or, even worse, false. We're smart enough to see the strings being pulled, and the actor and set never fades away into the character and condition. What's remarkable about Alejandro González Iñárritu's The Revenant is how effectively it transports us to another time and place, while always maintaining its worth as a piece of visual art. You don't just watch The Revenant, you experience it. You walk out of it exhausted, impressed with the overall quality of the filmmaking, and a little more grateful for the creature comforts of your life. Iñárritu and co-writer Mark L. Smith set their tone early, staging a breathtaking assault on a group of fur trappers by Native Americans, portrayed not just as enemies, but a violent force of nature. While a few dozen men are preparing to pack up and move on to their next stop in the great American wilderness, a scene out of Apocalypse Now unfolds. Arrows pierce air and flesh as the few surviving men flee to a nearby boat. It turns out that the tribe is seeking a kidnapped daughter of its leader and will kill anyone who gets in their way. At the same time, we learn that one of the trappers, Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio, has a half-Native American son named Hawk, Forrest Goodluck. Low on men and hunted, the expedition leader Andrew Henry, Domhnall Gleeson, orders that their crew return to its base, a fort in the middle of this snowy wilderness. John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, disagrees, and the seeds of dissent are planted. He doesn't trust Henry, and he doesn't like Glass. In the midst of these discussions, Glass is away from the crew one day when he's brutally attacked by a bear. The sequence is, without hyperbole, one of the most stunning things I've seen on film in a long time, heart-racing and terrifying. Glass barely survives the attack. It seems highly unlikely that he'll make it back to the base. With increasingly dangerous conditions and a tribe of killers on their heels, they agree to split up. Most of the men will go back first, while Fitzgerald, Hawk, and a young man named Bridger, Will Poulter, will get a sizable fee to stay with Glass until he dies, giving him as much comfort as possible in his final days and the burial he deserves. Of course, Fitzgerald quickly tires of having to watch a man he doesn't care about die. He kills Hawk in front of an immobile Glass and then basically buries Hugh alive. As Bridger and Fitzgerald head back, Glass essentially rises from the dead. The word revenant means one that returns after death or a long absence, and begins his quest for vengeance. With broken bones, no food, and miles to go, he pulls himself through snow and across mountains seeking the man who killed his son. He is practically a ghost, a man who has come as close to death as one possibly can, but is unwilling to go to the other side until justice is done. The bulk of The Revenant consists of this torturous journey, as Glass regains his strength and gets closer to home through sheer force of will. Iñárritu's Oscar-winning cinematographer for Birdman, Emmanuel Lubezki, who also took a trophy for Gravity the year before and could easily make it 3 in a row for this work, shoots The Revenant in a way that conveys both the harrowing conditions and the artistry of his vision. The sky seems to go on forever. The horizon is never-ending. He works in a color palette provided by nature and yet enhanced. The snow seems whiter, the sky bluer. Many of his shots, especially in times of great danger like the opening attack and the bear scene, are unbroken, placing us in the middle of the action. At other times, Lubezki's choices recall his work on the Tree of Life, especially in scenes in the second half when Glass's journey gets more mystical. And that's where the film falters a bit. Iñárritu doesn't quite have a handle on those second half scenes, and the 156-minute running time begins to feel self-indulgent as the film loses focus. When it centers on the conditions and the tale of a man unwilling to die, it's mesmerizing. I just think there's a tighter version, especially in the midsection, that would be even more effective. About that man, so much has been made of this film being DiCaprio's overdue Oscar shot that I feel like his actual work here will be undervalued. Make no mistake, should he win, it will not be some lifetime achievement win as we've seen in the past for actors who we all thought should have won for another film, Paul Newman, Al Pacino, etc. He's completely committed in every terrifying moment, pushing himself further than he ever has before as an actor. Even just the physical demands of this protagonist would have been enough to break a lot of lesser actors, but it's the way in which DiCaprio captures his internal fortitude that's captivating. His body may be broken, but we believe he is unwilling to give up. The minimal supporting cast is good, and it's nice to see Gleeson continue to have an incredible 2015, also in Brooklyn, Ex Machina, and Star Wars Episode VII, The Force Awakens. Tom Hardy is less effective, often going a little too heavy on the tics, wide eyes, shot up close, but I think that's a fault of the direction and not one of our best actors. In the end, this is DiCaprio's film through and through, and he nails every challenging beat, literally throwing himself into this character that demands more of him physically than any other before. What would you do for vengeance? What conditions could you surmount to get it, or would you just give up? Our favorite films often drop questions like these into our lives, allowing us to appreciate the world a little differently than before we saw them. The Revenant has this power. It lingers. It hangs in the back of your mind like the best classic parables of man versus nature. It will stay there for quite some time. Review. The Revenant. It's man versus bear, and bear wins, or does it? Early reports of Alejandro González Iñárritu's intestine-straighteningly brutal and beautiful new Western thriller, The Revenant, have understandably focused on one quite extraordinary scene. 19th-century fur trapper and frontiersman Hugh Glass, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, encounters some bear cubs in an eerily quiet forest and then hears the snuffly wet sound of their parent behind him, a grown-up grizzly who has gained a broadly correct impression of Glass's overall intentions. The ensuing scene is one of horrifyingly primal violence, a brilliantly conceived CGI reality cluster, during which I clenched into a whimperingly fatal ball so tight that afterwards I practically had to be rolled out of the cinema auditorium. The immersion and immediacy of that confrontation reminded me of the moment in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World when moviegoers go to the sensory-enhanced Feelies and watch a sex scene on a bearskin rug. They feel every bear hair. So could I? And I also felt every droplet of bear spittle, every serration of tooth, and I understood what it feels like when parts of your ribcage are exposed to fresh air and light rain. Some have described it as a rape scene. It isn't. But it's about power, fear, and rage, and this moment, quite as much as the human duplicity that follows, is the driving force for this film's theme, commoner in the movies than real life. Revenge. Revenge against men, and maybe a kind of revenge against nature. Screenwriter Mark L. Smith has worked partly from the 2002 novel by Michael Punke and partly from the real-life story that itself inspired the book, The Adventures of Hugh Glass, a Wyoming mountain man who survived a bear mauling and went on an incredible odyssey to track down the two men who abandoned him to die. This story fictionalizes and intensifies his personal circumstances and payback motivation. Glass has joined other civilian privateers engaged in a U.S. military expedition, led by Andrew Henry, Domhnall Gleeson, along the Missouri River to establish a lucrative fur trapping base. Glass and the others are set upon by tribesmen warriors in an electrifying and terrifying sequence. in which warning cries are silenced by the sibilant arrival of an arrow in the throat. Glass, an experienced tracker, guides the terrified survivor's retreat across country, where he is mauled by the bear, and 2 men are detailed and promised extra pay to look after him. Young Jim Bridger, Will Poulter, and John Fitzgerald, played by Tom Hardy with pop-eyed, truculent malevolence. Once left alone with their charge, they leave Glass to die in agony and figure on returning to base to pick up their extra pay with a fine tale about giving him a Christian burial. But they reckon without Glass's fanatical will to survive. Generally, immersive movies enclose, they put you inside. They dunk you down into what it is supposed to feel like. Iñárritu and his cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki do the opposite. They expose you to the elements. You are out in a piercingly painful cold, under an endless, pitiless sky. This is not an immersion that feels like a sensual surrender. It's closer to having your skin peeled. The images that the movie conjures are ones of staggering, crystalline beauty, gasp-inducing landscapes and beautifully wrought close-ups, such as the leaves in bulbous freezing mounds and a tiny crescent moon, all unsentimentally rendered. But there is also something hallucinatory and unwholesome about these images, as if hunger and pain has brought Glass to the secularized state of a medieval saint tormented with visions. Poignantly, he mimes shooting distant moose with a tree branch instead of a rifle, and when he suddenly comes across a vast plain full of bison, it's unclear for a second if he is imagining things. A ruined church looks like a miraculous example of cave painting. The Revenant recalls Ford's The Searchers and modifies its themes of tribal and sexual transgression and its cruel invocation of scalping. The warriors who attack at first are enraged at the kidnap of a Native American woman, Pawaka, Melanakeko. At other times, Iñárritu appears to be inspired by Herzog's Aguirre, Wrath of God, with the visions of imperial greed and the vast river in full flood, or maybe his documentary Grizzly Man, in which the grim-faced Herzog famously listened on his headphones to the sound of someone being mauled to death. There is arguably something of Altman in the wintry frontier terrain, and certainly a Malikian weightlessness in some of Glass's dreams of his wife. But what is so distinctive about this Iñárritu picture is its unitary control and its fluency. No matter how extended, the film's tense story is under the director's complete control, and he unspools great meandering, bravura traveling shots to tell it. Not dissimilar in some ways to his previous picture, Birdman. The movie is as thrilling and painful as a sheet of ice held to the skin. This gripping film is loosely inspired by Michael Punk's novel of the same name, recounting the near-fatal ordeals of real life. Frontiersman Hugh Glass, an early 19th century trapper and explorer, historical records on him are scarce, and it remains uncertain whether this legendary figure truly had a wife and children. Leonardo DiCaprio embodies Gloss, whose tale also involves a very young Jim Bridger, one of the 2 men ordered to remain by his side until death. The story had already reached the screen in Richard C. Heffern's The Man in the Wilderness, 1971, starring Richard Harris, which Warner Brothers later reissued on Blu-ray in August 2016 as part of its Warner Archive collection following the renewed interest sparked by The Revenant 2015. The central motif, a lone man's desperate battle with nature across an unforgiving frozen wilderness, echoes through other classics as well, such as Sidney Pollack's Jeremiah Johnson, Elliot Silverstein's A Man Called Horse, and Erwin Kersner's The Return of a Man Called Horse. In The Revenant, brutality dominates, striking sequences of violence and relentless death abound, though the rating remains PG-16 despite the blood-soaked images. DiCaprio excels as the fearless third trapper left to perish after a bear mauling, surviving to seek retribution through hostile native territory. His portrayal of Ugless earned him a slew of awards, including the Oscar and Golden Globe, achievements made even more impressive since he executed all the dangerous stunts himself without doubles. Alongside him, Tom Hardy stands out as the treacherous John Fitzgerald, a role that garnered him an Oscar nomination for his intense and sinister performance. They are supported by a strong cast including Donald Gleason, Will Poulter, Forrest Good, Paul Anderson, and Christopher Joner. The Revenant went on to claim 3 Academy Awards, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Cinematographer, plus 3 Golden Globes, among countless other honors. The powerful atmospheric score by Ruichi Sakamoto and Alvana Dodo, combined with Emanuel Levski's breathtaking award-winning cinematography, elevate the film to visual poetry. Directed and co-written with Mark L. Smith by Alejandro G. Inarchitu Amarus Puros 21G. Babel by Uniful Birdman. The film offers a sweeping and visceral experience. Rating 7.50. Fans of DiCaprio will be especially drawn to it. Almost every sequence brim with intensity. From the opening massacre at the trappers' camp to the infamous bear attack, the film rarely eases its grip. Even viewers skeptical of DiCaprio's past roles recognize the physical and emotional strain poured into this one, making his Oscar win richly deserved. Initially expected to seize Best Picture as well, the movie instead divided Academy voters, understandably, given how grueling it is to watch. The bear-mowing scenes in particular echo the raw brutality of the Passion of the Christ, leaving the audience incredulous that a human could possibly endure such torment in the God unforgiving wilderness where glass is abandoned. The film persistently reinforces the sheer harshness of the environment and the unimaginable resilience required to survive within. Ultimately, The Revenant stands as a testament to one man's unyielding spirit, a milestone in both Leonardo DiCaprio's career and Alejandro G. and Iñárritu's artistry. Its realistic long takes and naturalistic shooting style, reminiscent of Birdman, immerse the viewer completely in a survival story that is visually stunning as it is harrowing. Uglass's unyielding will to survive and confront those who deserted him forms one of the most grueling tales ever brought to film. Leonardo DiCaprio, covered in mud, blood, and sweat, communicates more through silence and sheer physical endurance than spoken dialogue, drawing the audience into the raw intensity of his ordeal. The level of visceral action on display is rarely seen in cinema, and for that reason alone, the film fully earned its Golden Globe victories, though it was frustrating to hear Alejandro González Iñárritu's name repeatedly mispronounced during the ceremony. During his acceptance speech, DiCaprio honored the world's indigenous communities and urged action to protect the natural world from corporate exploitation, a plea that remains essential. Meanwhile, The Revenant itself is an unmissable experience. Unlike anything most audiences could anticipate, my anticipation for the film began months before its premiere, and the excitement only grew as it garnered prestigious nominations and wins. Directed by Academy Award, BAFTA, and Golden Globe recipient in Our Amoris, Pearls Babble by Beautiful Birdman. The story, inspired by real events, is set in 1823 across the uncharted wilderness of the Louisiana Purchase. A qua-military expedition of trappers and hunters, led by Captain Andrew Henry Domall Gleason, embarks on a pelting venture. When they are suddenly ambushed by the hostile Arikara tribe, only a handful of survivors manage to escape by raft, salvaging what little they can while under relentless fire. Henry is aware that they are still being pursued. The group's progress slows even more when they're skilled. Tracker Hugh Glass. Leonard of DiCaprio becomes separated and suffers, a brutal mauling by a mother grizzly protecting her cubs. Though Glass manages to kill the bear, he is left catastrophically. Wounded, the trappers provide him only the most basic care, carrying him on a stretcher that hampers their retreat. Eventually, John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, a cynical member of the party, suggests ending Glass's life to avoid further delay. Though Henry himself nearly carries out the act, he cannot do it, instead offering money to anyone willing to remain with Glass until his death. Only Glass's son, Hawk, Forrest Good, and the young Jim Bridger will Poulter step forward, with Fitzgerald reluctantly volunteering when Henry increases the reward. Once apart from the group, Fitzgerald tries to suffocate the incapacitated Glass. Hawk discovers this, but Fitzgerald kills him in front of his helpless father. When Bridger returns, Fitzgerald lies that Hawk has disappeared and invents a story of nearby natives. Though doubtful, Bridger agrees to abandon Glass, leaving behind a canteen etched with a spiral. Buried, alive in a shallow grave, Glass draws on sheer resilience to crawl out, survive, off roots and marrow, and evade the pursuing Arikara by plunging into freezing rapids. At the same time, Henry and his men retreat to their crumbling outpost. When Fitzgerald and Bridger arrive, Fitzgerald pressures Bridger into silence, claiming Glass has died and takes his payment, while Bridger refuses his share. In the wilderness, Glass meets Hike Arthur Redcloud, a sympathetic Pawnee who's also suffered loss. Hike shelters him during a blizzard, but is later killed by French hunters who also assault the kidnapped daughter of the Arikara chief. Glass frees the girl, unknowingly returning her to her people, and escapes on a stolen horse, later surviving the night inside its carcass after tumbling down a cliff. When his engraved canteen is found on a hunter, a search party confirms to Fitzgerald the Glass must be Alizing exposure is imminent. Fitzgerald robs the outpost and flees. Henry and his men eventually recover Glass, who clears Bridger of blame, then insists on joining Henry to hunt Fitzgerald. Splitting up to corner him, Henry is ambushed and killed by Fitzgerald, but Glass lays a trap and pursues him to the gate. Riverbank. Though he wounds Fitzgerald and overpowers him, Glass recalls Hayek's wisdom that vengeance belongs to God, not man, and instead pushes Fitzgerald into the river, where the returning Arikara claim him. With their daughter restored, they spare Glass. Though his vengeance is fulfilled, he is left haunted by visions of his wife and son. Supporting performances from Paul Anderson, Christopher Jonah, Joshua Berg, Lucas Haas, Brendan Fletcher, and Dwayne Howard enrich the ensemble. But it is DiCaprio's raw embodiment of Glass and Hardy's menacing portrayal of Fitzgerald that define the film's power. This film, drawn from real events, unfolds in the untamed American frontier of the 1820s and explores themes of vengeance, redemption, and survival in a way that is both astonishing and deeply visceral. It depicts a man abandoned and left for dead, struggling against nature itself to endure and ultimately punish those who betrayed him. With breathtaking cinematography, striking use of natural light, and raw emotional power, it stands as an unforgettable historical revenge epic that demands to be seen. It rightfully earned the Academy Award for Best Cinematography, while also receiving nominations in numerous categories, including Best Picture, Best Film Editing, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing, Best Visual Effects, and Best Production Design. At the BFTs, it won for Best Cinematography, Best Sound, and Best Film, while also being nominated for Best Editing, Best Original Music for Ruchi Sakamoto and Karsten Nikolai, as Best Makeup and Hair. The Golden Globes honored it with Best Motion Picture, Drama, and a nomination for Best Original Score, an achievement nothing short of remarkable. The story follows Hugh Glass serving as a guide to a band of fur trappers when their camp is suddenly attacked by the Arikara, a native tribe seeking their leader-kidnapped daughter. Glass, alongside his half-pony son and the remaining survivors, escape Stone River. Soon after, he's brutally mauled by a grizzly bear in one of the most harrowing sequences ever committed to film. Although he manages to kill the beast, he is left on the edge of death. With the main group pressing forward to find safety, Glass is left in the care of his son and two men, one of whom is the hardened John Fitzgerald. Driven by selfishness, Fitzgerald argues they should abandon Glass, and when the opportunity arises, he attempts to suffocate him. When Glass's son intervenes, Fitzgerald murders him in cold blood before fleeing, leaving Glass to perish alone. Against all odds, Glass endures, nursing his wounds, crawling through snow, surviving on scraps of food, and pushing his frail body through hostile territory toward Fort Kiowa. His ordeal tests every ounce of his strength and willpower, all while Fitzgerald spins a tale at the fort that he did everything possible to save Glass. When Glass finally arrives, his only thought is vengeance. As with many films based on true events, historical liberties are evident, yet the narrative remains no less compelling. The opening ambush grips from the very first moments, while the infamous bear attack is staged with terrifying authenticity, making it nearly unbearable to watch. Once Glass is isolated, the movie conveys the desolation of the wilderness with brutal clarity. You can almost feel the numbing cold as he drags himself through icy rivers, trudges through endless snow, and even shelters inside the carcass of a dead horse. The performances elevate the entire production. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers a searing, physically punishing portrayal that deservedly earned him his long-awaited Oscar, while Tom Hardy brings menace and depth to the duplicitous Fitzgerald. At 2.5 hours, the film is long, yet never once does it feel slow or drawn out. The legend of Huglass has been retold and reshaped countless times over the past 2 centuries, whether through folklore, biographies, novels, or even earlier films like Man in the Wilderness, 1971. The truth of Glass's life may remain elusive, but this adaptation intensifies the emotional weight by giving him a son, heightening the stakes of his revenge. It may not be strictly accurate, but the blend of myth and cinema creates an unforgettable experience. With 12 Academy Award nominations, it became the frontrunner in numerous categories, an anticipation centered on whether DiCaprio would finally claim his long-overdue Oscar, having built a career of remarkable performances over 3 decades. Here he commits himself more fully than ever before, much of it through nonverbal expression, a challenge few actors could meet so convincingly. His work is matched by Hardy's supporting turn, which itself earned award recognition. Ultimately, The Revenant is a brutal, majestic, and unforgettable survival saga that stands among the finest cinematic achievements of its time. Tom Hardy's portrayal of Fitzgerald is every bit as compelling as Leonardo DiCaprio's turn as Glass, and in certain respects, he's even more entertaining to watch. His character is a ruthless, morally bankrupt figure, a true villain in every sense. Still, Hardy faces a surprisingly strong rival in the awards race, Sylvester Stallone. While Stallone is not typically praised as a master actor, his work in Creed has been earning widespread acclaim, and there's another element working in his favorite Oscar voters' subjectivity. Often decisions are influenced not just by a single performance, but by an actor's entire career, particularly when they are at a later stage in life. This could prove to be Stalin's shot at what essentially feels like a career-capping recognition. Hardy might be the more deserving winner, but nothing is assured. The film itself also holds multiple technical nominations, makeup, costume design, and production that stand a real chance of taking trophies. Perhaps its strongest feature, though, lies in Emanuel Lubezki's stunning cinematography. This is an especially difficult category, with Roger Deakins' extraordinary work and the daring 70mm approach of The Hateful Eight also competing. Yet Lubezki remains the frontrunner, boasting 8 nominations overall and consecutive wins for Gravity and Birdman. In fact, many argue this might be his finest achievement yet. Extended action. Sequences evoke memories of Seamus McGarvey's haunting work in Atonement. 2007. Could Lubezki walk away with a 3rd straight Oscar? Quite possibly. That said, not every nomination is equally well-deserved. The nod for Best Visual Effects is questionable. The infamous bear mauling sequence, while intense and well-crafted, never truly disguises the fact that the bear is a digital creation. As convincing as it is, the artificiality shows, which may momentarily jolt viewers out of the otherwise authentic wilderness immersion. It's also worth noting that this category often serves as a way to honor blockbusters otherwise overlooked, meaning Star Wars could easily prevail. Stepping back, the central question remains, is this DiCaprio's finest performance? Without doubt. Is it also Hardy's career peak? Arguably yes. Combined with Lubezki's breathtaking visuals, the result is extraordinary. Film of the year, that's debatable. What is clear is that it offers a stark, almost majestic brutality, not through gratuitous violence, but through its exploration of the best and worst of human instincts, resilience, willpower, treachery, loyalty, and desire, all set against the unforgiving backdrop of a Frozen Missouri winter. Leonardo DiCaprio embodies Hugh Glass, a frontiersman savaged by a bear while on a hunt with his fellow trappers and then abandoned by his companions. To endure, he must draw on raw survival, skills to battle both nature and hostile tribes, driven above all by his thirst for vengeance against Fitzgerald, whom he holds responsible. Alejandro Inarritu's direction plunges viewers into the visceral fight for life and later into the grim pursuit of justice. One might interpret the narrative as a reflection on how man's treatment of his peers mirrors his disregard for the natural world. Whether or not that was intentional, the end product is a searingly immersive, character-centric odyssey that grinds steadily toward a hard-earned conclusion, leaving the viewer shaken but thoroughly satisfied. I happened to see it on DVD from my local library. My wife chose to skip it. It simply wasn't her type of film. The title Revenant literally refers to one who returns from the dead, which, while not technically accurate here, feels symbolic for those who betrayed Glass and later witness his reappearance. For DiCaprio, betraying Hugh Glass finally secured him his long-sought Academy Award for Best Actor. In the story, he's part of a mid-sized expedition gathering pelts, perpetually wary of native attacks. After the brutal bear assault, he is found grievously wounded, his chances of survival dismissed. Fitzgerald, self-interested and hostile toward Glass's Pawnee heritage, becomes his key adversary. At over 2.5 hours, the film is lengthy yet gripping, fueled by staggering camera work across Canada's frozen landscapes. Major spoiler: when Glass is left behind in the snowy wilderness, it is Fitzgerald, a young soldier, and Glass's half-native son who remain. Obsessed with personal gain, Fitzgerald murders the boy and buries Glass alive. But Glass refuses to die. Clawing his way out of the grave despite crippled legs, he drags himself through a series of harrowing orals. Weeks pass as he heals, hunts for sustenance, and slowly regains strength. Ultimately, he limps onward toward the fort, never abandoning his resolve to confront the man who wronged him. Fitzgerald, caught off guard and realizing his misdeeds will soon be exposed, steals the expedition's money and flees toward Texas. However, Glass relentlessly hunts him down, and their bitter rivalry culminates in a violent confrontation amid the snow. Just then, a group of native warriors appears, recognizing Fitzgerald as both a kidnapper and abuser of native women, and they deliver him his fate. It was only weeks after Leonardo DiCaprio secured his long-awaited Oscar for Best Actor in this film that I finally managed to watch The Revenant, joining a friend of mine who works at a cinema and had already seen it earlier. DiCaprio embodies Huglass, the abandoned trapper left for dead by his companions, among them Tom Hardy as John Fitzgerald, whose selfish nature consistently reveals itself. Hardy, too, gave a strong performance that earned him an Oscar nomination, though he ultimately lost to Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies. The stark visuals of winter wilderness dominate much of the movie, perfectly harsh in tone, and the bear attack sequence in particular is nothing short of vicious and unforgettable. Because of that, I would recommend The Revenant, though those who cannot handle the brutality of that scene may want to think twice, yet I still found myself questioning some of the overwhelming hype surrounding this grim, punishing film. The opening with native warriors tearing through the fur traders is brutally excessive, and it still puzzles me why the Academy gave DiCaprio his Oscar for this role when he has had far stronger performances in other films. That choice felt misplaced. The true standout to me was Tom Hardy, whose villainous Fitzgerald grounds his cruelty in religious justification. At its heart, this is a revenge tale, and it stretches believability that Glass, after such a savage mauling, could find the strength to hunt down the man who killed his son. The Revenant manages to inspire both admiration and frustration. Some say was robbed of Best Picture. Others argue DiCaprio finally earned his award. This snow-covered odyssey set in the unforgiving American frontier of the part 1820s follows Hugh Glass as he battles nature wounds and grief, while determined to avenge himself against Fitzgerald for murdering his Pawnee son, Hawk Forrest. Good, while breathtakingly shot, at times the vast wilderness feels less isolated than intended. Though the film remains visually captivating, the characters are well drawn, leaving no doubt as to where the villain lies, though hearing trappers of the 1800s speak in modern slang felt jarring. The bear sequence is brutally raw and nearly unwatchable, rivaled only by the ferocity of the final duel. For me, those scenes alone make it a film worth revisiting many times. The cast worked tirelessly, including Donald Gleason, Will Poulter, Dwayne Howard, Mello, Nashku, Grace Dove, Arthur Cloud, Favorite Sad, Paul Anderson, and Christopher. Ultimately, this is a striking survival story, loosely drawn from the true tale of frontiersman Hugh Glass. Mauled by a bear, deserted by his party, and pursued by hostile forces, he embarks on a grueling journey of endurance and vengeance. Alejandro Gonzalez and Narichu, known for emotional and layered dramas like Amorous Pearls. Babel by Beautiful, and Birdman ventures into new territory here, blending symbolic dream sequences and haunting imagery with extended action. At times, those dreamlike interludes feel overlong or unnecessary, while some of the action set pieces come across as contrived. Nevertheless, the film is gripping and ambitious, balancing emotional resonance with raw brutality. DiCaprio delivers a visceral, almost wordless performance, while Hardy cements himself as a menacing force. Stunning cinematography elevates it. Throughout, though the pacing suffers toward the end when Inarritu adds unnecessary side plots, still, despite its flaws, The Revenant remains a compelling journey of survival, vengeance, and raw human will. The climax of the film feels inevitable and to a large extent foreseeable. Honestly, if The Revenant had only consisted of a single sequence, it would still have been worthy of Oscar recognition, and that sequence is none other than the infamous bear attack. Early in the film, Huglass Leonardo DiCaprio is mauled by a massive grizzly mother, and what unfolds is arguably one of the most convincing CGI encounters ever committed to film. The brutal assault lasts for what feels like an eternity. With every snap of bone and guttural growl rendered vividly, that savage attack becomes the catalyst for everything that follows, paving the way for a story loaded with tension, dread, and nerve-wracking suspense. At its core, The Revenant is about the sheer will to live against all odds. By all logic, Glass should not have survived. He was so close to death that even his own companions believed survival to be impossible. Yet when his son Hawk Forrest, good luck, is murdered by the treacherous John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, any flicker of resignation is instantly consumed by a burning, unstoppable hunger for vengeance. We've all seen revenge tales before, the familiar cycle where a protagonist loses a loved one and then endures endless suffering in pursuit of justice. But The Revenant stands above the generic mold. It is not a tale of a hero effortlessly tearing through countless faceless adversaries, nor is it about suddenly acquiring the abilities of a skilled assassin. Instead, this is the journey of a broken man, battered and half dead, enduring merciless conditions and unforgiving wilderness solely to reach the man who destroyed his world. At moments, the purpose of his fight almost recedes because survival itself becomes the immediate battle, starving, parched, frozen, and torn apart by injury. One could argue that his mere survival is far more astounding than any body count. In a conventional revenge narrative, the story follows a frontiersman of the 1820s embarking on a fur trading expedition with a party of men only to be savaged by a bear and then abandoned by his comrades. After watching his son die before his eyes, he drags himself through an unimaginable odyssey of pain and endurance, living only to avenge that death. With all the hype surrounding The Revenant, I approached it with high expectations, yet within minutes I felt let down. The violence is relentless, often excessive, and the gore overly graphic. The bear mauling stretches nearly 5 minutes, and the prolonged action sequences drag to unnecessary lengths where mere seconds could have sufficed. An oppressive sense of frostbite and raw cold lingers throughout, immersing viewers in a brutal tale of improbable survival. Against the merciless, climate of the northern wilderness, snow freezing, rivers and sub-zero temperatures push human limits, and when fur clothing turns drenched in icy water, survival becomes almost laughably impossible. But if you surrender yourself to where this story insists on going, it will subject you to an unflinching, punishing ride. Revenge, after all, is a dish best served cold, and in this case the phrase is made literal. The shoot itself was notoriously grueling. Cast and crew frequently voiced their frustration at the treacherous conditions, which have been well documented. Director Alejandro González Iñárritu, however, insisted on pushing the limits, rejecting green screens and artificial staging in favor of raw authenticity. His demand for pure naturalism made the production dangerous, but also yielded a visceral cinematic achievement. The breathtaking cinematography is among the film's strongest assets, with Emmanuel Lubezki's lens capturing sweeping vistas and an awe-inspiring grandeur of nature's dominance over man. Yet this beauty is consistently splattered with brutal violence, crimson blood vividly staining the white snowscapes. DiCaprio grunts, crawls, and gasps his way to an Oscar-winning performance, one that garnered more respect for its physical endurance than admiration for its emotional depth. His portrayal rarely shifts in tone from scene to scene, as the script keeps him locked in survival mode. Hardy, on the other hand, embraces villain as Fitzgerald, but he offers limited variety in his menace, often mumbling in his trademark way, albeit with a slightly altered accent. Ultimately, the film is an accomplished piece of work, though, weighed down by a clunky backstory of dreams and visions that feels forced. For some, it is not a masterpiece, but rather a finely executed raw spectacle aimed at a specific audience, largely masculine in its appeal. One persistent frustration I have with many Hollywood productions is their sameness. Over-reliance on glossy primary colors and hyper-edited sequences often reduces action to little more than music video aesthetics. The Revenant, while suffering from its own excesses, at least breaks free of that formula, delivering something unique, visceral, and undeniably haunting. These days, it seems almost every film has to include Tom Hardy, and it can leave you feeling like if you've watched one modern movie, you've essentially seen them all. Adding to that, The Revenant comes from director Alejandro González Iñárritu, the same filmmaker behind last year's Birdman, which I found pretentious and overly abstract. Because of this, the movie initially looked like standard Oscar bait material, so I went in with pretty low hopes only to come out genuinely impressed. Mild spoilers ahead, though. I used the word pleasantly earlier. Let me correct that now. There is nothing pleasant about this film at all. And that's not a complaint. If you're drawn to it only because Leonardo DiCaprio headlines, consider yourself warned. This isn't about glamour. This is very much the naked prey of the modern era. And while Cornel Wilde's 1966 film had to hold back due to the restrictions of its time, The Revenant doesn't shy away from much thanks to how far filmmaking has come. Animal lovers who can't bear to see creatures treated as food may want to stay away completely, since those scenes alone might disturb you for days. Still, it wasn't the animals that haunted me the most. It was the people. Mexican director Iñárritu achieved something remarkable here by delivering a film that feels truly cinematic in every sense. Though I've disliked much of his earlier work, this one left a lasting mark. The opening Native American raid is stunning in its realism precisely because it avoids Hollywood cliches like frantic cuts and constant close-ups. It feels raw and unexpected. Then comes the bear attack, which is so convincing I nearly toppled out of my seat wondering how did they pull this. It appears to play out in one seamless take with DiCaprio himself, not a stunt double under assault from what looks like a real bear. Throughout, I never once felt like I was simply watching a cast of recognizable stars pretending on a set. Instead, I believe these were real people caught between the unforgiving brutality of nature and the darker side of humanity. Cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki deserves immense credit for the icy, unrelenting beauty he captures, giving every frame a stark and frigid authenticity. Stephen Marion's editing is equally vital, blending together demanding sequences such as characters submerged underwater or the ferocious bear attack so flawlessly that it's easy to forget how complex and physically grueling they must have been to shoot. That said, the film isn't perfect. NRU occasionally indulges too much in art house stylization, and given the solitary nature of the story, a lone figure facing a hostile environment, it does lose a bit of energy. In its final stretch, another minor nitpick, Hugh Glass seems to have no trouble producing fire whenever needed. Perhaps he carried flint, but in such wet, frozen conditions, finding usable kindling strains believability. Still, these are small issues compared to the whole. Interestingly, I've noticed a lot of negativity surrounding this film. I suspect much of it stems from audiences being let down by expectations rather than by what the movie actually delivers. Personally, I found The Revenant a raw, merciless, yet utterly compelling survival epic. To me, it stands as the most powerful film of the year so far, and I have no doubt it will dominate at the Oscars deservedly. So, after all, even the dictionary meaning of revenant, one who returns after death or long absence, perfectly embodies Leonardo DiCaprio's Hugh Glass, who claws back from the brink of death itself. Inarritu, already Oscar nominated for his work, shapes this tale into an unforgettable frontier odyssey. Set in early 1820s America, based loosely on Michael Punk's 2002 novel, the story draws from the real-life exploits of Hugh Glass, a legendary contemporary of figures like Jedidiah Smith and Grizzly Adams. Glass wasn't just a trapper, but also a smuggler, pirate, captain, fur trader, hunter, and explorer. Here, though, Inarritu zeroes in on one brutal, extraordinary chapter of his life, surrounding DiCaprio with a rugged supporting cast and producing a cinematic achievement that's both savage and spectacular. You have never experienced Leonardo DiCaprio in the same way as you do in The Revenant, not even in The Wolf of Wall Street. The only film that comes close to placing him in such a dire situation was the French historical drama The Man in the Iron Mask opposite him. Tom Hardy, already known for roles like Max and Mad, Max Fury Road, and Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, creates a loathsome villain you will truly despise. The vast, awe-inspiring wilderness frames this epic tale, elevating both hero and villain into legendary figures as they battle through a world filled with dangers. Director Alejandro González Inarritu spent 9 arduous months filming the Pi Revenant in strict chronological sequence, traversing stunning locations across British Columbia, Montana, San Francisco, and eventually Argentina. Alongside him, Academy Award-winning cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki captured every moment using only natural light, adding a raw authenticity to the storytelling. As the story begins, Captain Andrew Henry Donald Gleason, seen in Ex Mina of the Rocky Mountain Trading Company, hires Huggle Glass Leonardo DiCaprio fresh from inception as a guide for a fur trapping expedition. Disaster strikes early when the camp is ambushed by fierce Arikara warriors. The brutal skirmish kills many trappers, and Glass advises the survivors to retreat to Fort Kiowa on foot rather than by river. Among them is John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, also of Lawless, a bitter and self-centered Texan trapper, who resents the plan but reluctantly agrees. While searching for food, Glass encounters 2 bear cubs, and moments later their enraged mother charges at him. In one of the most harrowing sequences in cinema, the bear savagely mauls Glass, leaving him barely alive. Though Glass fires a single desperate shot at the beast, she continues to shred him with her lethal claws until, fatally wounded, she finally collapses. With sheer determination, Glass delivers the final blow using his knife. Seeing Glass Nina death, Captain Henry commands his men to build a stretcher, but the landscape soon makes transporting him impossible. Believing Glass cannot survive, Henry offers a reward to anyone willing to stay behind until he dies and provide him with a proper Christian burial. Fitzgerald and young Jim Bridger Will Poulter of the Mazer Runner agree to remain alongside Glass's loyal pony son, Hawk, newcomer? Forrest Goodluck, who refuses to abandon his father. As time passes, Fitzgerald's impatience grows. When Glass stubbornly clings to life, Fitzgerald murders Hawk and attempts to bury Glass alive. Bridger, intimidated and fearful for his own safety, reluctantly goes along with Fitzgerald's treachery. Against all odds, Glass endures his wounds, clawing his way back from the grave to begin a staggering journey of survival and vengeance, determined to confront Fitzgerald for his betrayal. For context, The Revenant marks the third cinematic retelling of Hugh Glass's extraordinary ordeal. The first was Richard C. Sarafian's Man in the Wilderness, 1971, starring Richard Harris as a hunter, based loosely on Glass. Harris's character Zachary Bass survives a bear attack only to be abandoned by his fellow trappers. Though a commendable survival tale, it pales beside Naratu's epic. A much weaker attempt came later with Apache Blood 1975, a low-budget film by Vern Peele, who overextended himself as producer, director, and cinematographer. In that version, a scout named Sam Gloss wrestles with a bear in a clumsy scene, involving a man in a bear suit. Compared to this amateurish sequence, the Revenant CGI-enhanced mauling is chillingly believable. Despite their differences in quality, Man in the Wilderness, Apache Blood, and the Revenant all follow the same narrative arc. The hero is savaged by a bear, presumed dead, and betrayed by his companions. Similarly, Michael Punk's novel aligns with this structure, building the foundation upon which these films stand. In Man in the Wilderness, it is actor Percy Herbert's character who betrays Harris's base just as Fitzgerald betrays Glass in Anaru's base version. In Apache Blood, cowardly cavalry soldiers abandon Glass to his while in The Revenant, Tom Hardy's character shows no loyalty to DiCaprio. At times, the pacing slows as the protagonist drifts alone through bleak isolation. Yet despite this, The Revenant remains a visually breathtaking achievement worthy of its 12 Oscar nominations. It's easy to understand why the Academy recognized it. It is magnificently shot and features outstanding performances from its cast. Both Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy leave a strong mark on this survival drama. For DiCaprio, it stands among his finest roles, even though dialogue is sparse throughout the lengthy runtime, the film never drags. Instead, the silence and stillness intensify the overwhelming loneliness of the frozen landscapes. The guttural sounds of pain, the physical toll of injuries, and the unflinching brutality all weave together to convey this harrowing tale of vengeance. Some graphic sequences may unsettle viewers, but they also lend the film its distinctive power. Watching it, one can almost feel the sting of the frostbite. Hardy embodies a ruthless, heartless brute, a type of role he excels in. Although lengthy, the film never feels overly stretched. The theme of revenge is as ancient as humanity itself, but unless the audience connects with those involved, it risks being a hollow device. Alejandro G. Inarritu's grim vision offers 2.5 hours of DiCaprio enduring relentless hardship, culminating in a violent showdown with the man who betrayed him after the bear attack and murdered his son. Yet does Inarritu's telling shed new light on the human condition beyond perfunctory flashbacks of a slain wife? Is there real reason to invest in Glass's quest? Hardy's villain, delivered with no subtlety, feels more caricature than character. Every frame is directed with a self-conscious weight, as if Inarritu were reminding viewers to admire his artistry. Sadly, the outcome is a monotonous and one-note journey. DiCaprio seems destined to claim his long-awaited Oscar here, though. The role reduces him largely to grunts, groans and grimaces, his makeup doing much of the heavy lifting. Discussions of his performance often emphasize the hardships of the shoot rather than his actual craft. Birdman had once suggested a Norosei potential to resonate differently, but that seems the exception. His moral view reflects life as endless suffering with hope only, beyond death, an idea that leaves little to say to those who reject it. Still, flashes of brilliance shine through. "Keep breathing," Hughless whispers to his son in an early flashback. a phrase that returns throughout the film, perhaps. Inaru's reminder to viewers enduring the on-screen brutality with Emmanuel. Lubezki's exquisite cinematography and two powerhouse actors stripping away glamour for raw, unvarnished performances, the film delivers an intense, visceral experience. From the startling ferocity of the Arikara ambush to the relentless wilderness, the Revenant drags us into a world both unfamiliar and overwhelming. Set during the perilous early 19th century American frontier, survival was uncertain as danger lurked in every direction. Director Alejandro Iñárritu immediately seizes attention with what may be the most astonishingly realistic bear mauling ever shown on screen. Filmed to appear like an unbroken shot, the grisly assault on Leonardo DiCaprio's Hugh Glass is relentless. Clawing by, crushing, and hurling him about like a rag doll, the unflinching brutality of this sequence sets the tone for Glass's nearly impossible saga of endurance and deep retribution. Tom Hardy delivers a chilling portrayal of John Fitzgerald, a man whose quiet menace and disturbing unpredictability make him a truly terrifying adversary. Some of his thickly accented lines may be hard to decipher, but his looming presence perfectly embodies the merciless image of a backwoods frontiersman. His cruel treatment of young Jim Bridger, Will, Poulter, and tense power struggles with Captain Henry, Donald Gleason are captured with unnerving intensity. Viewers familiar with Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards will catch the historical reference in Jim Bridger's name. Though such rare moments of recognition offer the only levity in this 156-minute descent into suffering, DiCaprio is extraordinary here, wholly. Stripped of charm and vanity, his performance built entirely on raw emotion and physical torment. The film intertwines two threads, a desperate fight to survive and a blood-stirring pursuit of vengeance, while also emphasizing the dual nature of wilderness as both breathtakingly beautiful and mercilessly harsh. Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography brings an almost lyrical quality to landscapes reminiscent of Terrence Malick's work, only to be shattered by sudden torrents, plunging waterfalls, or the breathtaking fall of horse and rider from a towering cliff. Though the film leaves ambiguous how far or how long Glass journeys, what is undeniable are the countless physical hardships and elemental battles he must endure. For those able to keep their eyes on the screen, the imagery, harsh, haunting, yet deeply poetic, will be unforgettable. Technically, the film is groundbreaking, shot entirely on location in Canada and Argentina using only natural light with authentic detail. From costumes to sound design, the piercing hiss of arrows, the guttural roars of beasts, even Glass's ragged breathing all contribute to a visceral immersion where CGI and reality blur seamlessly. This retelling saddens some who note it erases memory of John Huston's Man in the Wilderness 1971, the first film based on this true story. Yet, while Huston's version, starring Richard Harris, was shot quickly with limited resources, Iñárritu's production spent nearly 5 years in meticulous creation, aided by advances in technology and a sweeping vision that reframes the tale. Is one of relentless revenge. In doing so, it transforms the legend of Hugh Glass into an operatic masterpiece of cinematic endurance. Released in late 2015, The Revenant reimagines the historical ordeal of Glass, a fur trapper who survived a savage bear attack and crawled nearly 200 meters to Fort Kawa after being abandoned by his companions during General Ashley's 1823 expedition. Though altered geographically, the Missouri River Plains replaced by more majestic scenery, the story remains rooted in the essence of human survival against impossible odds. What results is not only one of DiCaprio's finest performances, but also a visually and emotionally overwhelming achievement that ranks among the most unforgettable epics of its era. While another film may boast a stronger storyline, The Revenant unquestionably excels in its filmmaking. It's not simply a matter of having a bigger budget, breathtaking outdoor locations, or a talented cast. The use of modern cinematic techniques elevates the movie to remarkable heights. For those who enjoy survival and wilderness adventures, this film is essential viewing. Though its runtime extends beyond 2.5 hours, it holds attention steadily, rarely feeling sluggish. The realism is striking, although there are moments that drift into almost cartoonish exaggeration, reminiscent of Roadrunner antics. Clocking in at 156 minutes, the production spanned across Alberta, British Columbia, Montana, Arizona, Mexico, and Argentina. Despite being a strong piece of cinema, it suffers from excessive hype. Without that buildup, one could safely call it a solid, uncompromising work. Unlike the oversimplified good versus evil stories, so common in Hollywood's politically correct narratives, The Revenant thrives in shades of gray, asking audiences to consider the messy realities of survival. Out in the wild, detached from social contracts and the rule of law, survival reverts to the primal codes of nature. If the hunt fails, the hunter himself may become prey. In this sense, Fitzgerald Tom Hardy embodies a predator-like instinct for survival. While even the bear's ferocity is rooted in a mother's instinct to shield her cubs, the movie strips bare the raw cruelty of nature, forcing viewers to consider how quickly modern society could collapse under hunger and scarcity, reverting to brutal conditions from 2 centuries ago. At its core, the film captures both the cruelty and humanity of people under extreme duress. The story follows Hugh Glass, a seasoned trapper and guide, leading survivors after a devastating Indian raid. Mauled by a bear and left abandoned, his son, murdered by Fitzgerald Glass, endures an almost impossible fight to live, determined to seek vengeance. Directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, the film is a blend of visceral power and visual beauty, showcasing even more flamboyant directorial ambition than his Oscar-weighing Birdman. The opening ambush sequence is a marvel of filmmaking. Long, unbroken takes with seamless camera maneuvers that seem impossible to achieve. Throughout, the film remains visually stunning. Spectacular landscapes, masterfully choreographed action, seamless special effects that blur reality with illusion, and a constantly prowling camera that immerses the audience. Every frame reveals the punishing conditions of the shoot. Still, flaws emerge. The story, running at 156 minutes, could easily shed half an hour, particularly during Glass's prolonged wilderness wandering. DiCaprio's mostly wordless performance leans heavily on anguished expressions rather than nuanced acting, while Hardy's authenticity as Fitzgerald is undermined by near unintelligible dialogue. Inarritu repeatedly frames the sky through pine forests, striking at first but redundant after dozens of repetitions. Plot clarity suffers too, especially with the subplot involving the kidnapped native girl, and Gloss's survival stretches credibility, given the freezing rivers and brutal wounds. Visually, the film is steeped in dark, desaturated tones, a stylistic choice that feels overused. Still, the essence of the narrative remains gripping. Set in the uncharted 1800s wilderness, Glass, injured by a savage bear attack and betrayed by his bat companions, channels his grief and thirst for revenge into an arduous trek across frozen landscapes in pursuit of Fitzgerald. The film plays like an extraordinary fusion of Quest for Fire, Come and See, First Blood, and Gladiator. Despite its punishing length, its breathtaking cinematography and sustained tension make it one of the year's most compelling works. Its grim tone immerses viewers so deeply that one almost feels the freezing winds and punishing terrain alongside the characters. Beneath the harsh realism, the film carries an ethereal, dreamlike quality, as though we're experiencing it through Glass's exhausted, pain-clouded perspective. Once again, Inarritu proves himself a master craftsman with extraordinary attention to detail. While Birdman flaunted its one-take illusion as its central gimmick, The Revenant achieves its artistry through unrelenting realism, technical ambition, and raw emotional force. Sparse and spoken lines, yet overflowing with raw intensity, The Revenant anchors Glass's relentless will to survive and seek vengeance on 2 unforgettable sequences. The bear mauling is not merely a savage 5-minute ordeal rivaling only. Bone Tomahawk's grisly climax is one of the year's most harrowing depictions. It is nearly perfect in its execution. The seamless effects, coupled with the illusion of being captured in a single unbroken shot heighten its overwhelming impact. Equally haunting is the moment where Glass, utterly incapacitated and aware he will inevitably close his eyes, is forced to watch Fitzgerald commit an unspeakable atrocity. In this wordless sequence, DiCaprio channels fury, grief, guilt, hatred, and impotence with flawless precision, his performance so staggering that should he earn the Oscar, it would be justified by this scene alone. Artie, too, is a formidable presence, though his occasional drift into his Bane inflection somewhat distracts from otherwise gripping moments. Still, the film as a whole refuses to compromise, pulling viewers into its harsh world through unflinching long takes that immerse them fully. If it doesn't sweep the awards for cinematography, it would be nothing short of scandalous. The Revenant 2015 stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, Donald Gleason, Will Poulter, Forrest Goodluck, Paul Anderson, Christopher Jonah, Joshua Berg, Dwayne Howard, Malo, New, Fabrid Sad, Arthur Redcloud, Christopher Rosen, Robert Maloney, Lucas Haas, and Grace Dove. Directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, who co-wrote the script with Mark L. Smith. Adapting Michael Punk's novel, the film reimagines the classic Western vengeance tale with a scale and artistry echoing works like The Outlaw Josie Wales. DiCaprio gives himself over body and soul in one of his most demanding roles as frontiersman. Ugless, brutally mauled by a bear and left for dead by Fitzgerald, a venomous Hardy who also murders Glass's native American son. Fueled by sheer resolve and a thirst for retribution, Glass's odyssey becomes both a tale of survival and a meditation on vengeance. Shot with painterly vision by Emmanuel Lubezki, complemented by the evocative score from Matt Bryce Desna, Karsten Nikolai, and Ruichi Sakamoto, and framed by Jack Fisk's production design that transforms the frozen wilderness into a landscape of both alien beauty and spiritual menace. The film emerges as one of the year's finest achievements, one that truly demands to be experienced. On the bow, largest screen possible, a chilling visceral saga of endurance and revenge, The Revenant radiates atmospheric power at every turn. The magnificence lies not in the simplicity of its plot, but in the extraordinary way an otherwise straightforward story is elevated. Through masterful craft. Watching Glass claw his way through betrayal, loss, and the merciless winter landscape is to witness ordinary narrative transfigured into extraordinary cinema. DiCaprio delivers a career-defining performance, one that not only justified but demanded his long-awaited Oscar, while Hardy's ruthless villain lingers in equal measure. The haunting music amplifies every shiver of dread, and in our juice, directorial control proves nothing short of astounding, securing him a second consecutive Academy Award for Best Director. Whereas Birdman showcased his technical daring, The Revenant represents his most deserved accolade yet, marrying vision, grit, and artistry into an unforgettable epic. To watch this film is to be reminded of cinema's ability to overwhelm the pie senses. It is a classic that insists on being seen without distraction on the grandest scale, a work of breathtaking contrasts. The Revenant sets nature's sublime beauty against humanity's ugliest instincts, greed, betrayal, and cruelty. The outcome is a film that leaves viewers with a hollow, sorrowful sense about the westward expansion in America's history. Taking place in 1823, the story follows a band of American fur trappers who are ambushed by the Arikara tribe. After sustaining severe losses, the remaining men retreat, guided by Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio. However, Glass is soon betrayed after a devastating bear mauling leaves him near death. The men charged with safeguarding him murder his son and abandon him in the wild. From this moment, the narrative shifts into one of survival and vengeance. Dialogue becomes sparse during this prolonged portion of the film, with much of the attention directed toward breathtaking landscapes and sweeping natural scenery. The fight greatest strength of the movie lies in its cinematography. DiCaprio's performance arguably owes much to the meticulous work of the makeup and hairstyling team. His lines are minimal, and much of his delivery comes in faint whispers due to the throat wound inflicted during the bear attack. If DiCaprio's Oscar could be shared, it would rightly go to designers who helped shape his portrayal as a visual spectacle. The Revenant is striking, though it never fully achieves the depth of a historical drama or a profound character exploration, leaning instead to war being a blockbuster. Browsing through online stories, I came across the now infamous account of DiCaprio's brutal bear fight, which almost made me imagine gearing up for a bear hunt alongside him. The plot unfolds in 1823 during a hunt for animal pelts. The group loses half its men in a surprise assault by the Re-Indians. Burdened further when Hugh Glass is critically mauled by a bear, the leader arranges to leave him behind under the watch of Jim Bridger and Glass's son Hawk, promising them rewards if they finish him off. Suspicious of their hesitation, Outlaw, John Fitzgerald persuades the leader to let him stay. Once the others depart, Fitzgerald makes his move to kill Glass. Hawk tries to defend his father, but assuming Glass is on the verge of death, Fitzgerald abandons him, stirred. Back to life by the sight of his son's corpse, Glass drags his mangled body from the ground and vows retribution against those who forsook him. As for the cinematic vision, co-writer and director Alejandro González Iñárritu, alongside cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki, plunged the audience into a grim, immersive world. Their tight tracking shots follow streams of blood seeping from Glass, pausing to highlight each agonizing blow and wound. Committed to authenticity, Iñárritu insisted on real locations and strictly natural lighting, prolonging production and even driving crew members to quit. Yet the results justified the hardship, giving the film an unparalleled raw beauty. He harnesses the natural elements with precision, showing how flickers of light through the trees guide Glass through raging rivers and snowstorms. The environment's beauty is pierced by Iñárritu's brutal realism, shifting from the terrifyingly raw bear attack to the final bloody clash with Fitzgerald, where blood spatters across the lens itself. Loosely drawn from Michael Punk's novel, the script laces the harsh Western landscape with haunting tenderness through Glass's bond with his son, a fragile warmth that resonates. Throughout, rejecting the usual romanticized revenge tale, the writers carve out a darker, more tinged narrative where every step Glass takes toward vengeance costs him another piece of flesh and heart. Bringing this intensity to life, Tom Hardy delivers a chilling betrayal of Fitzgerald, a remorseless psychopath hidden behind a facade of survivalist grit, revealed in every growl of dialogue. DiCaprio, meanwhile, immerses himself fully in the Guillaume role, enduring extreme methods such as eating raw meat and sleeping inside a buff carcass to mirror Glass's struggle. His performance pulses with grief and rage, carrying the memory of his son at its core and giving every faltering step toward revenge an indomitable weight. The film's direction is breathtaking, opening with a battle sequence as gripping as Last of the Mohicans and climaxing in a bear attack that is almost unbearable to watch. In the end, The Revenant is not just about surviving and returning home, is a visceral odyssey of pain, vengeance, and endurance against a merciless wilderness. The film carries a notable Native American presence, and in line with modern expectations, it treats their portrayal with a sensitivity fitting for a 21st century production. The true perpetrators of brutality, those responsible for murdering women and children and committing acts of rape, are depicted primarily as French soldiers and trappers, with the central antagonist being Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy. One point of dissatisfaction in the story, however, is why only 2 men were dispatched to pursue Fitzgerald, a choice that feels oddly limited. Moreover, the climactic battle scene comes across as excessive, closing the narrative in a conventional Western fashion when it could have aimed higher. Performances overall, the acting is solid. Leonardo DiCaprio convincingly conveys the torment of hunger, injury, and exposure to freezing conditions. His sheer endurance of physical hardship alone could justify an Oscar. The mostly British supporting cast delivers well. 2. Will Poulter portrays the slow-witted character effectively, though the casting as a whole presents an issue. Too many actors share similar looks. greater variation in appearance. Different hair colors or fewer beards would have helped, as even the captain and Fitzgerald appear somewhat alike. Hardy plays a formidable villain, but his heavy mumbling accent makes much of his dialogue unintelligible, a needless choice since the rest speak in relatively standard tone and atmosphere. Many films have addressed the theme of wilderness survival, yet few have matched this one in length and visceral brutality. Beyond the central tale of endurance, the narrative layers in a grim feud and power struggle on the American frontier enriched by breathtaking landscapes and intimate depictions of the natural world. Collectively, this makes The Revenant a mesmerizing but harrowing experience. That said, it is not suited for the squeamish, those unable to stomach blood, animal killings, or haunting images of cruelty should avoid it. Source and recognition. The story and screenplay draw partly from Michael Punk's 2002 novel of the same title, centered on Hugh Glass in 1823 during the unsettled fur-trapping era of the Upper Missouri Territory. The plot is familiar and easily found in other reviews, but its execution stands out. The cast consistently delivers strong performances, with DiCaprio's embodiment of Glass meriting his Oscar win for Best Actor of 2015, and Hardy's Fitzgerald, equally deserving of his Supporting Actor nomination. It is equally difficult to imagine any film surpassing this one in cinematography. Its triumph at the Oscars in that category, as well as multiple BAFTA wins for cinematography, sound, Best Film, and Best Actor affirm that distinction. Symbolism and craft. While I have not read the book, the film introduces layers of symbolism, Wend and Braith as motifs of life, mysticism woven through visions and spiritual imagery. The production spanned diverse filming locations from Argentina and Mexico to the American Southwest, Alberta, and British Columbia. Having traveled much of the American Northwest and Western Canada, I found the abundance of mountainous backdrops somewhat inaccurate, as trappers of that time often traversed gentler hills and wide prairies. Additional observations. Certain details also raise questions. Characters exhibit remarkable accuracy with primitive flintlock rifles, striking targets far beyond realistic doom. The cinematography, though generally immersive, sometimes breaks. The illusion close-ups of Glass even cause the camera lens to fog, a distracting reminder of the filming. Mystical elements are punctuated by evocative imagery, such as shots of wind through treetops, or the fleeting moment when Glass remembers his slain native wife and a dove emerges from her dress. Yet not all props sustain realism. When Glass slices open his dead horse to shelter inside, the bundle of organs he removes is visibly an artificial sack. The film is bloody, grim, and styled to appear authentic. Yet, anyone who has ever dressed an animal would know that the heap of organs would have been far too wet, slick with blood, and slippery to simply pick up so easily and rest neatly on a log without sliding off. After Glass finds his will to endure, whether driven by vengeance or by a desire to see justice done for his son's murder, he echoes another man's words: revenge belongs to God, not me. The film offers several memorable lines. Hugh Glass states he's afraid. He knows the distance I've traveled for him. Just like that elk, when fear strikes, they run deeper into the woods. I've already cornered him. He just doesn't realize it yet. Another line from Glass: no, I'm not afraid to die anymore. I've already done that. A conversation with Captain Andrew Henry goes, "Is it true you killed an officer?" To which Glass replies, "I only killed the man who was trying to kill my boy." The landscapes are breathtaking. The towering trees, tranquil rivers that suddenly turn roaring, and violent, radiant sunrises and sunsets even more spectacular. The mountains are staggering, the snow omnipresent, and the chill always palpable. Alongside this beauty comes relentless violence, countless battles with arrows, muskets, knives, and even the occasional axe. Death is constant, men fall, horses perish, and the brutality is as harsh for the viewer as for those enduring it. Wildlife is scarce, yet there is the unforgettable bear sequence, one of the most harrowing fights ever filmed with DiCaprio. Even though we know the grizzly was created with CGI, the realism makes it astonishing. Everything else in the film feels grounded. And as Glass hovers between death and survival, dragging himself through snow, weak from hunger, we cling to the hope he will prevail, though the journey does stretch a little long. The Revenant 2015, directed by Alejandro Guy and Archu with Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, Donald Gleason, Will Poulter, and Forrest Goodluck, is a punishing tale of man against nature, animal, and humanity itself at its most merciless. The story unfolds in 1823 when a fur trapping mission unravels after a violent native attack. Survivors flee by boat but are forced into the frozen wilderness to avoid further pursuit. DiCaprio as Scout Hugh, Glass gives a raw performance, attacked by a grizzly mauled nearly to death, yet killing the beast. Hardy plays John Fitzgerald, a greedy, callous trapper who murders Glass's pawn son and leaves Glass for dead. Revenge keeps Glass alive as he crawls and limps across the wasteland toward the confrontation Fitzgerald dreads. Donald Gleason is Captain Andrew Henry, who later demands Fitzgerald face justice after the truth surfaces. Will Poulter portrays young Jim, Bridger misled by Fitzgerald, who suffers guilt upon learning Glass might have survived. Forrest Good is Hawk Glass's son, demeaned and ultimately killed by Fitzgerald. Following the acclaimed Birdman, Inarritu crafts the Revenant with haunting imagery, snow-draped forests, violent storms, and savage encounters, including a desperate chase where Glass and a horse plunge off a cliff. The film is unflinching, showing man's breed against another's resolve to crawl through death's shadow in search of justice. Based on the real-life frontiersman Hugh Glass, the film explores survival after abandonment in uncharted wilderness. The title itself, Revenant, means one who returns, often a ghost haunting the living. But here, Glass is no spirit. He's a man reborn through suffering, returning from near death to hunt the betrayer who destroyed his family. In this regard, Glass truly embodies the notion of a revenant, a man who seemingly returns from the dead to confront and torment those who wronged him while still alive. The film setting is also distinctive. Whereas most Westerns are placed between 1865 and 1890, the decades directly after the Civil War, it is rare to encounter one rooted as early as the 1820s. The theme itself is not revolutionary, since revenge has long been a central motif within the Western genre. In fact, Glass's ordeal had already been brought to the screen in the 1971 picture Man in One, The Wilderness with Richard Harris. I have not personally viewed that film, so I cannot judge it against The Revenant. But Alejandro G. Inarritu's work differs from typical revenge westerns, less in subject matter than in its manner of storytelling. Traditional vengeance ties in this style are briskly paced, swiftly driving toward the inevitable climactic duel between the protagonist and antagonist. Hanny Calder 1971 being an apt example, though it uniquely featured a female avenger. The Revenant, by contrast, unfolds as a sweeping Western epic, more measured and intentional in tempo. Rather than beginning with the infamous bear attack, as many directors likely would have, Inarritu introduces the narrative with a violent confrontation between trappers and an Arikara war party. Throughout most of the film, the central focus rests less on revenge itself than on Glass's relentless battle to endure not only his savage mauling, but also the merciless cold, starvation threatening native tribes, and a hostile faction of French, likely French-Canadian fur traders. Leonardo DiCaprio, known for embodying characters that are vastly different from one another, shines here in perhaps his most physically demanding role. The rugged mountain man, Hugh Glass, stands in stark contrast to the sophisticated figures of Jay Gatsby or Howard Hughes the Aviator, or even his turns as J. Edgar Hoover and the youthful con artist Franca Bagnell in Catch Me If You Can. In this role, verbal expression is minimal. Glass spends much of the journey with no one to converse with, and when dialogue occurs, he remains a man of few words. His internal world is communicated largely through expressions, body language, and sheer presence. The physical requirements were grueling. DiCaprio subjected himself to harsh realities similar to glasses, such as plunging into freezing rivers or taking shelter within a buffalo carcass. His nomination for Best Actor was thoroughly merited. Not every performance, however, reached the same standard. Tom Hardy as the treacherous Fitzgerald often mumbled his lines so unclearly that comprehension was strained. Sean Penn, an original casting choice, might have been a stronger fit. One of the film's most extraordinary features is Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography. Nearly every frame resembles a painting, calling to mind the sweeping works of American landscape. Artists like Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Cole, and Frederick Church. While much of the film was shot in Canada, production delays that stretched into late spring forced the crew to capture its closing sequences in the snowy Andes of southern Argentina, one of the few regions where snow remained. The visuals are not mere scenic embellishment. Since much of the narrative occurs in late autumn and winter, beauty is not the prevailing quality. Instead, the imagery aims for sublimity, portraying nature's majestic indifference to human existence, a theme that underscores the extraordinary nature of Glass's survival. The Academy recognized the film in key categories, with DiCaprio earning Best Actor and Archichu winning Best Director and Lubezki taking Best Cinematography. In many respects, though, nature itself emerges as the true protagonist. The Revenant is both a visceral survival tale and a moving portrait of a father's love, but it is also an endurance test. For the viewer, stretching to 156 minutes of unflinching brutality and raw, natural elements. Adapted partly from Michael Punk's novel with a screenplay co-written by Mark L. Smith and Inarritu, the film can be condensed to its essence. In 1823, frontiersman Hugh Glass is savagely mauled by a bear, abandoned by his hunting party, and left bereft after his son Hawk Forrest Goodluck is killed. Driven by grief and vengeance, he navigates a frozen wilderness to confront John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, the man who betrayed him. Alongside DiCaprio, the cast includes Hardy, though hindered by his thick accent, Donald Gleason, Will Poulter, and Forrest Goodluck. Yet beyond the performances, what resonates most is the elemental struggle of man against nature. For those reasons alone, the film commands attention. Personally, I was drawn to it for two key elements: DiCaprio's remarkable performance, which finally secured him an Oscar, and Lubezki's inspiring cinematography. Having seen it, I believe it stands as a classic in the making. If there is anything negative to be said, I cannot find it. The lingering wide shots and uncomfortably close close-ups all work magnificently in service of the story. The effects, particularly the sequences involving the bear attack, are incredibly graphic, yet at the same time, disturbingly realistic. The creature itself looks astonishingly authentic. What also adds to the film's believability is the portrayal of the Native Americans. The decision to have them speak their own language and voice their motives, mainly reclaiming their land, feels true to history. The film never drags. Not a moment feels wasted. And for those who truly love cinema, this is essential viewing. It is nothing short of breathtaking. To me, this is the very definition of art. The cinematography here might be the finest I have ever seen in any film. So many frames could easily be paused, printed, and displayed as works of art. I'm not exaggerating when I say I could have done that hundreds of times throughout the movie. Beyond that, the directing left an enormous impression on me. Time and again, I found myself asking, who could have crafted this? Even in moments where seemingly nothing was happening, I was completely enthralled, simply because of the director's vision combined with the camera work. On top of this, the acting is simply remarkable. Two extraordinary performances delivered by two of my favorite actors, both giving everything they have. More than just a foam, this was one of the most visceral, authentic experiences I've had. On screen, countless times I found myself tense, squirming in my seat, fists clenched. Gut-wrenching is the most fitting word. It wasn't the sheer level of violence that unsettled me. I've witnessed far worse in films like Hostel, but rather how powerfully the emotions were transferred to the audience. Those moments felt raw, authentic, and brilliantly executed. Another choice that stood out was the minimal use of music. In many scenes, the absence of a soundtrack heightened the realism, even though I normally love when music is used to amplify tension. In fact, the lack of musical cues made events strike harder, as if they were unfolding in real life. Often this didn't even feel like a movie at all. Part of that authenticity came from the suddenness of key events. For instance, the bear attack occurs instantly after we notice the animal lurking in the car. There's no extended buildup, no dramatic roar, no heavy score, just immediate shocking brutality. Likewise, in the final confrontation, when Glass severs two of Fitzgerald's fingers, it happens abruptly. There's no exaggerated pause to highlight the injury, no cinematic dramatization, just a quick, brutal cut that makes it hit harder. I deeply appreciated how the film conveyed the harshness of life in the ungoverned frontier, immersing us in the lawless, unforgiving struggle for survival. Still, there are some flaws worth mentioning. The film could have been trimmed down as its length begins to weigh on the experience. Certain dream sequences, though beautifully shot, ultimately felt disconnected from the story and didn't contribute as much as expected. To be honest, the plot itself is quite straightforward and not especially original, but that's precisely what makes the achievement so impressive. With outstanding performances, visionary direction, and breathtaking cinematography, an ordinary story was elevated into something extraordinary. Based on the true ordeal of Hughless, an 1820s fur trapper battling for survival after betrayal, The Revenant fuses survival, revenge, and faith into a single relentless journey. The natural landscapes are captured so vividly they feel alive, almost overshadowing the narrative by their sheer power and beauty. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers the most demanding performance of his career, embodying Glass as he pushes through bitter cold, exhaustion, and near death. From the opening ambush of fur traders by native warriors to the horrifying grisly encounter to the drawn-out mission of survival and revenge, the story constantly grips with its intensity. The bear attack in particular is staged with such realism and brutality that it leaves Glass nearly destroyed, setting the stage for his unrelenting pursuit of vengeance. In the end, The Revenant is a punishing, emotionally charged epic that reminds us of humanity's struggle against both nature and itself. It is as much about enduring faith and the bonds of family as it is about pain and violence. DiCaprio's transformation, both physical and emotional, is astonishing. His best performance yet, and the sheer extremes he endured only add to the film's impact. Though the film occasionally overstays its welcome and falters in its symbolic imagery, it still stands among the finest pieces of cinema of its year. A raw, dazzling spectacle that blends art and brutality in equal measure, it plays out as a straightforward revenge story blended with a survival drama. Leonardo DiCaprio portrays a frontiersman who has a son of mixed native heritage hired to serve as a guide for a company of fur trappers after their group endures an attack by native warriors. DiCaprio's character is brutally mauled by a bear. Since he is badly wounded and unable to continue, two men, Tom Hardy and Will Poulter, are left behind with his son to tend to him until the end inevitably comes. Hardy, however, grows impatient and in cold blood kills the boy, deceives Poulter by insisting that hostile tribes are approaching, and shoves DiCaprio into a shallow grave while he is still alive. Against all odds, DiCaprio claws his way out of the earth and sets out to hunt down Hardy, driven by a fierce desire for vengeance. The movie is most powerful when the camera work forces you directly into the actors' faces, immersing you so deeply that you feel inside the moment. It is weakest whenever it slips into flashbacks and dream sequences loaded with heavy symbolism. The climactic confrontation feels absurdly overdone as well. Donald Gleason also appears, clearly deserving a break after all the work he has put in lately. I have a great fondness for Enaru's earlier films, but this one falls flat. In fact, I believe DiCaprio has little ability in serious dramatic roles. Still, for those who admire him and enjoy grim action tales, this could be appealing. The negative points, direction that feels misplaced. Inishew excels in delicate layered dramas, but he falters when trying to deliver a pure action epic, which this movie essentially is. Another flaw, the supporting cast is barely average, sometimes downright irritating. On top of that, the cinematography, while perfect for capturing breathtaking landscapes, looks out of place in such a bleak, violent tale, too polished and overly glossy. Is it a bad film? Not. Exactly. If grim, violent sagas about men crawling through the dirt are your taste, you may like it. Certainly worse movies exist. Performances feel natural, though sometimes so understated that the dialogue becomes inaudible beneath thick beards and constant mumbling. Most notably from Tom Hardy, whose villain comes across as implausibly cruel and without reason. The characters repeatedly act foolishly, wandering into forests where bear cubs cry out, something no hunter could ignore since a mother bear would never be far behind. Naturally, that attack sets the whole plot in motion, without which the narrative would not exist. But the biggest lapse of logic comes at the finale, when two supposed heroes pursue a desperate killer into harsh wilderness, only to split up in a dangerous environment. Such choices are laughably reckless. Ultimately, the script is flimsy with no psychological depth, relying instead on striking effects. And yes, the visuals are magnificent. Vast wilderness landscapes filmed with great artistry, often resembling pure poetry. The cinematography, reportedly shot entirely without artificial lighting, lends the night scenes an eerie authenticity, while the sheer effort of filming under brutal outdoor conditions deserves respect. Some sequences even capture a kind of Call of the Wild exhilaration, especially the stunning buffalo stampede. Yet the story is built in such a way that you often sympathize more with the native people and even the animals than with the trappers themselves, who wreak only destruction and incompetence. One can imagine the earlier Richard Harris John Huston adaptation from 1971, which I have not seen, might have told the tale with greater strength. Perhaps the weakness lies in its insistence on natural realism, since human beings are there. Most savage often behave stupidly, but that realism only pushes you further towards siding with the tribes and the bears. And finally, it feels odd that the native woman whose life DiCaprio's character helps save shows nothing more than a silent glance when departing with her. Father, surely she would feel compelled to acknowledge his role. Tennyson once wrote of nature, red in tooth and claw, a line born of romanticism and the rise of naturalism. In the 19th century, anticipating Darwin's revelations that forever stripped away mankind's rosy illusions. About nature and humanity, director Alexandro González Iñárritu, together with screenwriter Mark L. Smith, adapts Michael Punk's novel into a raw, naturalistic cinematic experience that stretches over 156 minutes, feeling every bit as long as The Grueling Months. Explorer Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio, spent recovering in the 1820s wilderness after being abandoned, mauled nearly to death by a bear, and then deserted by his fellow trapper John Fitzgerald. Tom Hardy, who compounds the betrayal by killing Glass's son in his presence. Glass claws his way across nearly 200 meters of unrelenting frontier terrain to seek retribution. While at its core, the story follows the familiar path of survival and vengeance. DiCaprio and Hardy's performances elevated into something visceral, agonized, and unshakably real. One can only imagine the extremes DiCaprio endured for this Oscar-caliber role, which relies less on spoken lines and more on raw physical expression, channeling an almost deranged determination to endure and to avenge. Nowhere is the film's commitment to brutal authenticity more evident than in the staggering bear attack sequence. A breathtaking display of naturalistic violence as a mother grizzly defends her cubs by tearing into glass. This primal ferocity extends to the Pony people's presence in the story, epitomized when a tribal leader bitterly recounts what the white man has stripped from his people. Visually, Emmanuel Lub's cinematography, fresh off the Tree of Life, turns winter's bleak palette into something both merciless and sublime, painting sharp grays and icy whites that rarely allow the sun to break through, perfectly reflecting. A world where animal pelts define wealth and survival hangs on fragile chance. This is not a world that forgives mistakes, nor one that values human life above nature's indifference. Although not everyone's style of film, The Revenant is undeniably crafted with excellence on every level: story, acting, score, and imagery, making its best picture potential hard to dismiss. Even if it wasn't my personal favorite of the year, I wouldn't object if it claimed the award. And perhaps this might finally deliver DiCaprio his long-denied Oscar. The film begins in near confusion, with little exposition, but gradually settles into a straightforward tale. Glass endures what is arguably the most harrowingly realistic animal mauling ever filmed, only to be forsaken by his companions. When his son is slain, survival shifts into vengeance, pitting man against both nature and his fellow part. The Revenant may not be a film I choose to revisit, but its authenticity, ambition, and punishing scope command respect. It stands as one of the starkest, truest depictions of the frontier I have seen, harsh, unyielding, and utterly unsuited for children or casual audiences, but essential for cinephiles and lovers of Western grit. Inarritu's direction makes you shiver, bleed, and gasp alongside the characters, plunging you into the same bitter cold and suffering. DiCaprio delivers one of his rawest performances. While Hardy vanishes completely into the skin of Fitzgerald, a character both vile and magnetic. Though it didn't take home Best Picture, The Revenant remains among the most unforgettable works of 2015. A triumph of immersive filmmaking. DiCaprio's journey through helling, burial, eating raw fish and liver, tumbling down cliffs, sleeping inside animal carcasses, as both a physical endurance test and a showcase of his devotion to craft. While some feats were genuine and others cinematic illusion, the sheer extremity of the role highlights an actor pushing himself to limits in pursuit of that long-awaited Oscar. Inarritu calling off his win for Birdman crafts an even more imposing epic this time, 2.5 hours of ferocious storytelling, loosely inspired by true events through his meticulous demands and Lubezki's transcendent visuals. The ordeal of Glass unfolds with staggering power, every frame as breathtaking as it is relentless. Lubezki already crowned for Gravity, and Birdman seemed poised for a third consecutive Oscar, though such brilliance leaves veterans like Roger Deakins perennially overlooked. Whether or not one agrees with the Academy's methods, this was undeniably Leonardo DiCaprio's year, and The Revenant his ultimate proving ground. Hardy's supporting nomination, though perhaps less dazzling than some of his other roles, still cemented his breakout year alongside Mad Max, Fury Road, and Legend. Co-star Donald Gleason equally prolific, with Ex Machina, Brooklyn, and Star Wars. The Force Awakens rounded out the powerhouse ensemble. The Revenant is not simply a film but an ordeal, one that demands patience, fortitude, and a tolerance for its unflinching brutality. And some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.